An independent panel has found no evidence that South Africa supplied Russia with arms. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa revealed the findings during his address on Sunday. This follows allegations that South Africa loaded a consignment onto the Lady R ship. This was in December of last year. Let's speak now to ARMSCOR chairperson Phillip Dexter, who has made some observations about those who peddled this particular assertion. Let's begin with this, Mr. Dexter, and thank you for your time. The U.S. ambassador and the Democratic Alliance, when you say they must be held accountable for what we now know as the Lady R saga, what would that translate to in practical terms?
Well, let me first say that, accountability is very important, and both the U.S. ambassador and the Democratic Alliance wanted accountability from the government, from ARMSCOR, from the SANDF. The President appointed this commission of inquiry to show that an independent person would investigate these allegations. It was patently obvious all the way from the beginning that this thing was untrue, because no arms could have been exported from our country without us going through the proper channels, including the NCACC. So this rumor was peddled, started by people who live in Simonstown who took photos of the ship, and then it was, in a very dishonest and disingenuous way, turned into an allegation by politicians and by the U.S. ambassador. The point is there was no evidence. They had an opportunity to provide evidence to the inquiry, and they didn't. The consequences of these rumors led to, our currency being devalued, led to the image of our country being tarnished, the image of ARMSCOR, the SANDF, and the government being tarnished. And I feel that there should be accountability. Now, in the case of the political party concerned, well, obviously, there isn't much we can do other than hold them to account in front of the public. But in the case of the U.S. ambassador, I believe that something should be done, and our government should be lodging a formal complaint about his conduct in this regard.
Well, he was demarched by the Minister of International Relations when these allegations were made back in May. Would that not be sufficient? And I'm saying this because listening to those who opine on these issues, I'm talking about the political pundits who watch this, they're saying that if South Africa, for example, were to demand the expulsion, in fact, were to expel, rather, if they were to expel the U.S. ambassador, that would change the relationship between South Africa and the United States for the worst, perhaps.
Well, that's possibly true, and that's why I'm saying my own view is that he should be expelled, but that's me as an individual. As a chairperson of ARMSCOR, I can't, say anything on behalf of the organization, and the government must ultimately decide. But I do think that it's important that, people are seen to be held accountable, because, politics is politics. Obviously, everyone plays, it's a rough and tumble, there's point scoring on all sides. But what happened here was far more significant than that, because let me first say, the demand for transparency, earlier this morning, Henny van Vuren was demanding that the cargo manifest be made public, for example. Now, we're dealing with sensitive military information. This is about our men and women who fight to defend this country. No country has to have that level of transparency. That would put our soldiers in danger. We can't allow the enemy to know what it is that we have in our arsenal. So some of the claims that people are making are absolutely ludicrous. And I think that when it comes to point scoring, it's one thing. But when you go beyond that and you cross the line, I would argue that when you start to do this kind of thing and undermine our security forces, you are now in the realm of what we call treason. And I think that that's a very significant thing. Now, of course, the U.S. ambassador has no responsibility towards our country in that regard. But the USA is supposed to be our friend. Why would they allow one of their officials to tell such blatant lies about our country, about our defense force? about, the security system in our country. Why would people go to those lengths? And I think that there is an agenda, because this was in the context of the Russian-Ukraine conflict, and there's been a persistent effort by certain countries to force us to toe the line as South Africa and to support them in their support for Ukraine in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And we have said categorically that we are not going to take sides in this conflict. And that also means that we're not going to supply weapons to either side.
Yeah.
So, to make these allegations is very, very serious. To mention the fact...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. But let's try and deal with what the Democratic Alliance says it is uncomfortable about. One, they're saying that the signal of this ship at some point was switched off as it made its way towards Simonstown. Are you aware of that aspect?
I've been told that. I'm not aware if it's true. But it would not be unusual for that to happen, because if it was delivering a sensitive cargo, and there may be many other reasons for security that it would do that, it would only do that with the permission of the authority in the port. So, and let me just say, if it switched off its signal and wanted to remain, untraceable, why would it appear in broad daylight in the Simonstown harbor? Quite frankly, some of these allegations are insulting and patronizing. Nobody is that stupid to bring a Russian ship into Simonstown in broad daylight to do something illegal. It really, really borders on the ludicrous. So all these kind of conspiracy theories now, I think, are attempts to justify the fact that people have been dishonest, they've told a lie, they've done something that goes against our national interest. Our government should be held accountable, absolutely, but it should be held accountable for rumors, gossip, lies, and innuendo. Frankly speaking, people who do that are not acting in the interests of our country.
Let's tackle this one. The Democratic Alliance, again, saying that the choice of Simonstown for this ship to dock, it possibly was the first, and that it was unusual for a ship to dock at Simonstown, particularly that was delivering such equipment. ARMSCOR, that's the company for which you work, was the recipient of the consignment that was loaded onto that ship. Are you aware that Simonstown may have been the first, and is that something unusual that the ship would dock in Simonstown, where usually would ships that bring such arms to South Africa would normally deliver the consignment?
I'm not prepared to divulge what are, important confidential and secret information about our country. Whether the ship docked in Simonstown, Durban, Saldanha, or anywhere else is not the point. It offloaded cargo. The recipient of that cargo was the SANDF. And as you know, as the inquiry has stated, the special forces who are busy fighting and trying to defend people in the DRC, Mozambique, in very, very dangerous conditions. So where the ship docks, frankly speaking, is absolutely inconsequential. What is at point here is there was a claim and an allegation that we loaded weapons to supply Russia. That has been proven to be categorically false. Number two, we ordered equipment that was supplied to the SANDF and delivered to them. And that's all that matters. All these other things are just smoke and mirrors for people who are trying to justify the lies and the nonsense that they have told.
And so for the DA, what would you demand be done, or at least what should they do as a political party, given that they don't seem to accept the findings of this investigation?
They should apologize to ARMSCOR, apologize to the SANDF, they should apologize to the people of South Africa, because what they have done is simply unacceptable. And I don't think that we should accept it. I'm happy to be held accountable for real things, there are real issues, real challenges that we face in our country, that ARMSCOR faces, that the SANDF faces. We must all be held accountable, but we can't allow such irresponsible, reckless, and destructive behavior.
Phillip Dexter, thank you very much for your time. ARMSCOR chairperson talking to us there about the outcomes of the investigation, whose report is not going to be made public because, as you've heard him a number of times saying that there are sensitivities surrounding the consignment that was loaded onto that ship.